Hello and welcome to today's Economics Pig at School student podcast on income distribution and poverty we are going to look at today. So it's a topic that we have already covered, we'll cover again briefly next year, and comes up, there's almost certainly a question, again either in the data response or the essay on the paper one, or at least one of the questions will be in some way linked to income distribution and poverty. So in terms of poverty, we've got two types of poverty, absolute and relative. So absolute poverty is where you cannot afford the basics or necessities to sort of interact with everyday normal life. Relative poverty has a bit more of a strict definition. It is where you have 60% of the median income. So absolute poverty definitions can change from country to country. So you could argue that with so many things being done online, if you don't have a smartphone, you could argue you are in absolute poverty in this country. That would obviously be a different definition to if you lived in sub-Saharan Africa, or as absolute poverty where you wouldn't have food. But the relative poverty is obviously a comparison within that country to the other people around it. So 60% of the median, and that would just be internally in that country. We've also got to distinguish between the difference between income and wealth. So wealth is your stock of assets, which would usually in this country, the biggest asset people have is their house, but also any savings they've got, any pension, and any other assets they own. So maybe their car. So wealth is sort of a fixed thing. Obviously you can add to it, but it's more fixed. Then you've got income, which is your regular flow of earnings. Obviously most people's biggest income is their job from their pay, but obviously if you're a pensioner it would come from pensions, and you've also got benefits, any interest earned, or any rent if you are a landowner. So the question might ask you about distribution of wealth or income, and they're obviously very different. So wealth inequality is worse in this country, in most countries, than income inequality, even though they're both quite wide. Wealth inequality is worse. There are then also two different definitions we need to know: the difference between equality and equity. So equity is basically linked to fairness. Do we think that our distribution of income or wealth is fair? So most people don't believe that we should have a completely equal split, because then it takes away incentives. But the level of distribution, the level of difference between rich and poor, is that equitable? Is that fair? And equality is obviously just the difference. So it is how equal or unequal we are in terms of equality. So you could argue that something is unequal, so inequitable, in terms of inequality, but you could argue that is equitable. So you might have a split in income, but you might think that that is fair. In terms of equality, there are two different equalities we should be aware of as well. That is equality of outcome and equality of opportunity. So equality of opportunity is that everyone gets the same chance. So everyone will go to a good school. Everyone starts from the same position. Equality of outcome is that after that equality of opportunity, so if we all did go to a good school, we all started from the same place, if then some people had higher earnings and did better than others, then I think most people would say, well, that's okay, because we all had equality of opportunity. So most people would see equality of opportunity as fundamental, and then the equality of outcome, I think most people would see as kind of fair. On a diagram, the diagram we would be using here is the Lorenz curve. So the Lorenz curve, remember, you've got the percentage of income or percentage of wealth on the y-axis, and then the percentage of income earners, or the percentage of wealth gainers, I suppose, on the x-axis. So remember, you've got your straight line going from the origin to the top right-hand corner. That would show you perfect equality. And then you've got your Gini coefficient line, so you'll have a line showing you what the actual difference is, and the gap between that perfect equality straight line and your other line, your Gini coefficient line, that shows you how unequal a country is. So the further away you are from that straight line, the more unequal your country. The Gini coefficient will come out as a number. So a number between 0 and 1 would be the Gini coefficient. It shows you how unequal your society is. The key bit to remember there is that 0 is the straight line. So 0 is perfect equality, and 1 would be where one person would get all of the income or wealth, so perfect inequality. So if you are nearer to zero, you are more equal, so that would be Sweden, Norway, your Scandinavian countries. The further away you are from that line, the more unequal you are. If you're at 0.6, 0.7, up to 1, that would be India, America, Britain, countries that are unequal and have a big inequality split. The reason income and poverty, it is a market failure. It's not allocating resources in the most efficient manner. And one of the reasons for that are the costs that poverty especially provide with society. So the costs of poverty, you've got the likelihood of more externalities. So that might be from antisocial behaviour, from economic crime like burglary or shoplifting. So externalities tend to go up the more poverty there is. If people in very unequal societies, so at the moment Britain's inequality is rising, partly due to in-work poverty, so people on zero-hour contracts only having part-time work, they have jobs but not enough money. This is bad for the government because it means they're receiving less tax revenue, which is happening, so income tax receipts are going to be lower if people are earning lower income. And obviously it also means that the government's benefit payments, welfare payments are going up. If more people are unemployed, then job seekers allowance payments are going up. But equally, if people are in work, they might have to receive in-work benefits, which cost the government money. The main advantage of some level of income inequality is the incentive argument. So that there's got to be some level of inequality, otherwise why study at school, why work harder? You need that incentive to work. So that's the big advantage of having some level of income inequality. The causes of income inequality and poverty vary. For absolute poverty, really, if in this country we're looking at homelessness, that's really only going to be caused by unemployment. So if you are in absolute poverty, that would be unemployment. These are then going to be linked to other things. So if you have a low skill base, poor education, that is more likely to lead you to be unemployed, to lead into absolute poverty. But actually it might also just lead you to relative poverty because you might have a job, but it's not paying enough. So causes of relative poverty might be those low skills, which will link to low paid jobs, 0-hour contract jobs, jobs that don't require much skill, that the workers might be quite easy to replace, so the pay is reflected in that and it's low. If you're unemployed and benefits are very low, then that will also be another cause of poverty especially, so the low level of job seekers allowance. So job seekers allowance has been frozen for 7 or 8 years now, but with inflation in real terms it means job seekers allowance has seen in real terms cut quite heavily, which is going to lead to poverty for those people that haven't got a job. Whilst on that links to the unemployment or poverty trap. So the unemployment or poverty trap is where you are on benefits. So it's not usually just job seekers allowance, but it might be a combination of benefits, things like housing benefit, combined with that universal credit. If you are better off staying on benefits than getting a low paid job, then that is when you are in the poverty or unemployment trap. So the two ways of solving that, and we'll get onto solutions in just a second, the two ways of solving that are obviously lowering job seekers allowance or increasing the pay of those low paid jobs. So the solutions are to income inequality and poverty are varied. But again, remember, you stick with the most obvious and the most appropriate solutions to what you are asked to do. So you might be, in terms of in-work poverty, which is the most common poverty at the moment, improvement in education and training. So it could be apprenticeships, getting more skills, having to stay in education until 18 or some form of training. So this upskills workers. It means they become more inelastic in supply as a worker. Therefore, they will get, or they should be able to get, higher wages. The downsides to this, like most supply side policies, are the costs and time. There is a time lag and it costs the government money. Also, there's the opportunity cost to the person, and it depends obviously also on the quality of the institutions providing the training or education. For these low paid jobs, increasing the national minimum wage, or it might be called the living wage now. So you can show that on a diagram: wage rate on the left hand y-axis, number employed on the x-axis at the bottom. If you increase that minimum wage level, the aim is, I think, to get it to £9. At the moment, it's around £7.50, £7.80. And remember, the ages are staggered, so there's a minimum wage for 16 to 18, 18 to 21, and then 21 and above, I think. So the minimum wage is staggered, but if you raise that, obviously people have more disposable income. The downsides are that it adds to firms' costs, which could then lead to fewer jobs, because then firms won't employ as many people. You could lower benefits to provide an incentive. So just talking about job seekers allowance, if you lower benefits, that provides the incentive for people to go to work. However, obviously in the short term, that is going to increase the level of poverty for those people, because those people aren't going to have that income in the short term. One of the big things that the government have done in recent years is increase the tax-free allowance. So on income tax, the first up to £11,500 now is not taxed. It used to be as low as £7,000, so you used to start being taxed after the first £7,000. Now, if you earn, say, £10,000 from a part-time job, you won't pay any income tax at all. You will pay some national insurance, but you won't pay any income tax on that. This obviously means workers get to keep more of their money. This provides an incentive for them to go to work. Gives them more disposable income, which keeps them out of poverty. But on the downside, what it does is it lowers government revenue. So they're obviously receiving less money. And remember with that, just because people are getting to keep more of their money, some of the key costs of living, such as energy bills, rent, they're still going up. So just because you're keeping more of your money, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have more disposable income or be better off. It does depend on what those sort of necessity costs are, which another thing that's been in the news in the last few years, energy prices, energy price capping would be another way to help income or especially poverty. So there's fuel poverty is where you're paying, I think it's over 40% of your income on fuel. It might be 20%. If you capped energy prices, then that would obviously help that. But then the energy companies would say, well, that's profits we're using to research and develop, which we discussed with oligopolies earlier on. Same goes for rent. If you're in sort of rent poverty, it means you're paying a certain amount of your income is going straight out on your rent. If you had some kind of rent capping scheme, regulation, then that would lower your rent costs, enable you to more disposable income and get out of poverty. Then the landlords would say, or people renting would say, well, that would take away the incentive to put it onto the market. So there's always the evaluation point to be made. With income distribution and poverty, I would say there is over 90% chance of it coming up on paper one to some degree. Read the question carefully. So does it focus on absolute or relative poverty? Does it focus on income or wealth? So is it talking about how to get rid of wealth inequality? The biggest way to stop wealth inequality is a change in the inheritance tax. That's the reason we have such big wealth inequality in this country, is to do with inheritance. So you would need to change inheritance tax around that, but maybe also capital gains tax, which is the change in price of your assets. So if you bought a share for £10, sold the share for £20, that £10 difference would be taxed. So capital gains tax you could also look at. And again, absolutely vitally, you need to look at the most, what is the type of poverty? So is it pensioner poverty? Is it in work poverty? Is it absolute poverty caused by being out of work? So that's important. And then when you're looking at the solutions, the question would almost certainly be how to stop inequality. Choose the most appropriate, which is why I only discussed 3 or 4 different ones. You choose the most appropriate solution. Discuss the solution and then obviously the downsides to that. So which type of poverty is it? Absolute, relative, pensioner, etc. And then the most appropriate solutions with the correct evaluation points made.